This week we've got a highly anticipated pick, the very first Pokemon ever to be made. That's right, it's Rhydon. Yup, Rhydon was actually the first Pokemon ever designed. According to the Pokemon artist Ken Sugimori, the original Pokemon designs were far more like dinosaurs. And maybe this kind of shows Pokemon went through evolution just like us. I mean, look at how far they've come. But of course, since Rhydon have got an evolution later, we're going to be covering big ol' Rhyperior too. Well, once he enters the picture. Until then, we're on Rhydon, who we've talked about a lot in Gen 1. This is how good was Rhydon and Rhyperior actually. And again, I'm only going to be covering one per generation, and it's usually whoever the better one was. In this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. As we've mentioned before, Rhydon and Golem were the two interchangeable blockades that prevented Zapdos from running amok in Generation 1. When it came to choosing between Rhydon and Golem, Rhydon brought slightly more bulk and power, but it lacked the speed and explosive factor that Golem had. Actually, there was quite a recent discovery that lowered Golem and Rhydon's usage a bit. Turns out that in Gen 1, moves of a certain type can't status Pokemon of that type at all, which means that a Body Slam from Rhydon or Golem, the two Pokemon that can actually tank a Hyper Beam from Tauros, can't actually paralyze Tauros. For a while, the simulators actually didn't have that worked in because no one even knew, but now other status spreaders have come to the fore because of it. That said, Rhydon still has a good amount of uses. For its part, it resists paralysis from T-Wave and can tank Hyper Beams like no one's business. As for counters, you might think Starmie as a fast water type would be a good answer, but most Starmies actually carried Blizzbolt as their attacking moves. Blizzard still did a great amount of damage, but Starmie had to be afraid of 250 pounds of Body Slam coming its way. But if Starmie wasn't up to your taste, then Exeggutor still had the bulk to switch into Rhydon's moves and then kill it with a 4x Giga Drain. Of course, that water and grass 4x weakness meant there were a good amount of Pokemon which could threaten Rhydon quite heavily. But to be quite honest, those types weren't really at the head of the pack in Generation 1, which is exactly where Rhydon was, as one of the premier staples of the game. Gen 2 saw Rhydon sticking to its guns, or to its rocks I guess. Rock Slide and Earthquake were still an extremely potent sweeping combo, and Rhydon's crazy 130 base attack meant that those Earthquakes demolished a good part of the metagame. And the move Curse only boosted its strength since it didn't really care about outspeeding things anyways. It had really good matchups against a lot of the top threats in Gen 2, including the two electric legendaries Zapdos and Raikou, and impressively Snorlax if it didn't have Earthquake. Rhydon was one of the few select Pokemon in the game that could even begin to think about going one-on-one with the sleeping giant. But of course, Raikou's sibling Suicune gave Rhydon a hell of a lot of problems. Able to tank its hits and then sweep it in the turn, it was just the most prominent of the water types that could stop Rhydon in its tracks. Exeggutor was also still a solid counter, but grass and water moves in general meant that Rhydon, despite its bulk, had to be wary of what it was fighting. Combined with its weakness to Earthquake, it became more of a tank than a wall, a role in which it faced quite a bit of competition from Tyranitar and Steelix. Tyranitar because it had only one 4x weakness to worry about, better speed and the move Pursuit, and Steelix because it could explode. But with all of that said, neither of them had both stab on Rock Slide and Earthquake, and it was that niche and the 130 base attack that let Rhydon stay high in usage. Also, since poor Golem was just overshadowed by other rock types, the rock ground duo from Gen 1 was pretty much broken. Poor Golem. Rhydon's gigantic attack gets an even bigger boost in Gen 3 with a choice band to wrap around those big old rock arms. However, it was really hard to use because, let's be honest, a limited attacker with 40 speed is not the most versatile thing in the world. That being said, if you could predict accurately, it could do quite a number on anything that switched into it. And if you didn't predict correctly, well, you basically just had a useless rock as opposed to a more useful rock. Even with all its destructive power, there were even more things this gen that made Rhydon into Rhydon. Bulky water types were everywhere, and Celebi's descent to overuse meant it could put the hurt on the Rhino. Weezing now had Levitate, Claydol likewise could abuse its low special defense, it goes on. With so many possible halts to its assault, Rhydon found itself in borderline, as so many other Pokemon who are hard to use but boast undeniable power have over the years. What? Rhydon is evolving? As Rhydon strapped on some plate armor, it gained 10 points in every stat except for speed, and a kick-ass new ability in Solid Rock, which reduces super effective damage by 25%. When combined with the special defense boost it received in Sand, Rhydon's defenses were far superior. Get it? To its old evolutions? But that's also, of course, if you're actually running a Sand team, because otherwise it doesn't have that, but it's still worth a mention. And thanks to Edgequake, Choice Band, and its even greater attack than before, Rhyperior could 2-hit KO pretty much everything in the tier. With the physical and special split, Aqua Tail and Fire Punch became quite viable coverage options. And of course, it still faced the hindrance that was its miserable speed. And to avoid getting set up on by certain sweepers like Dragonite and Gyarados, Rhyperior also ran a set with Rock Polish. If it could set up, it was still outsped by a lot of things, but at least least it wasn't the slowest Rhino on the planet anymore. However, Rhyperior's move pool allowed it to do a lot of things. It could also rest talk, attempt the sword dance for even more power, and even stall out in sand with substitute. That said, Rhydon's old counter still haunted the new wrecking ball that was Rhyperior. But even more than that, its competition got even fiercer. Other ground types like Gliscor and Hippowdon boasted reliable recovery, meaning that they could stick around and hit for longer, and Swampert's typing was by far better. Sure, none of those things could hit as hard as Rhyperior, but sometimes multiple turns of good hits is a lot more trustworthy than maybe one massive hit, if your Pokemon can survive longer anyway. Rhyperior still made several appearances in overuse, but disappointingly enough, its evolution actually fell to underuse. Over in the early days of VGC, Rhyperior saw some amount of use. Well, actually we could only find one clip of it, but it was in the World's Finals of 2009, so that's probably worth talking about. We can figure out pretty easily why it was popular though. With the most powerful rock slides in the game, it could hit the other team for massive damage, although its low speed guaranteed it wasn't really going to get any flinch hacks. On the World Finals team, it was also run with Hippowdon, so we can assume that Sandstorm helped it out a bit. And finally, we know that it was run with a Lumberry to avoid all the Will-O-Wisps going around. Finally, yeah, Solid Rock is good, but Lightning Rod in doubles is great, allowing Rhyperior to soak electric attacks for its teammates. So we don't know that much info about Rhyperior, and since Trick Room did come out this generation, maybe on other teams, it was used as a Trick Room setter, but hey man, World's Finals, so you know, it's worth a mention at least. Gen 5 Rhyperior played pretty much exactly the same as Gen 4 Rhyperior. Weather Wars were simple enough to handle, good in sand, bad in rain, but Rhyperior honestly didn't even see Weather Wars that much, since it was still outclassed to other ground types that weren't 4 times weak to water. It had an especially hard time distinguishing itself, and so it found itself in underuse once more. And that's basically it, straightforward, just like Rhyperior. We've been talking about it a lot, but Rhyperior Speed is atrocious. Good for it, because it means that it can use Trick Room to its advantage and run amok with Earthquake and Rock Slide. Honestly, Rhyperior has a ton of double specific advantages. Those moves, Lightning Rod, slow speed for Trick Room, yeah, that's all pretty good in doubles. It played about the same in Gen 5 VGC, but it was even more prominent since it did well against the ever-present Thundurus, since it could come in and redirect electric moves for its teammates. It also did really well against Cresselia, since it could 2-hit KO it with Mega Horn, which is pretty ironic because Cresselia was one of the most prominent Trick Room setters at the time, and it could also 1-hit KO Latios with Mega Horn. Unfortunately, rain teams once again destroy Rhyperior in doubles as well. But at least this time around, if Trick Room is up, it'll definitely move first before most of the other Pokemon. And thanks to all this, Rhyperior, along with Camera, became one of the better Trick Room sweepers in Gen 5 VGC. That being said, its sets are still pretty damn straightforward. Gen 6 had some good news for Rhyperior. It was actually a great check for a lot of threats, new and old, including Talonflame, Mega Charizard X, Mega Pinsir, Dragonite, and an unboosted Excadrill. And that's where the good news ends, honestly. No recovery, a susceptibility to burns, those pesky grass and water weaknesses. Yeah, this thing has downsides for days. It really is good against a great amount of Pokemon in the tier like Zapdos, Excadrill, and Mandibuzz, who are all common hazard removers that don't want to do that right in front of Rhyperior. So it fits the role of a stealth rocker pretty well. But with more and more grass and water types and grass and water type moves on other Pokemon, it just gets bopped more and more easily. In fact, so easily that it ended up in rarely used. A sad fate for an evolution introduced just 2 gens before. But there you go, competitive Pokemon takes no prisoners. Over on the VGC side of Gen 6, listen, you get it by now. Rock Slide, Earthquake, great abilities. Yeah, Rhyperior is good in doubles. It's not everywhere, but yeah, pretty good at tanking and dealing damage. And the new item's weakness policy and Assault Vest gave it new options too. It also helped a lot that it could tank hits from Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Salamence, 2 of the most prominent Megas in VGC at the time, and it hit them both back extremely hard with Rock Slide and or Earthquake. However, despite being a pretty good Trick Room sweeper and having more items to remedy its gaping special defense weakness, Rhyperior still had to fear priority Will-O-Wisp, fighting moves, and Wide Guard, which all cripple it immensely and are all pretty damn common. Again, Rhyperior was still decently used in Gen 6 VGC, but not exceptionally used. And that's it. So how good were Rhyperior and Rhydon actually? They were decent, at least for a bit. Rhydon's great tank stats and amazing attacking power meant it started out great, but since then it steadily decreased in use as its weaknesses became more and more exploitable. Even a new evolution couldn't slow its descent, and honestly, with a typing like that, it's hard to say what would. They had their time and now can't keep up, literally cause they're rocks. Which is appropriate, just like the mighty dinosaur, they once reigned freely, but hey man, even dinos got nerfed out of existence. Thanks for watching everyone. As always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, comment on which Pokemon you want to do next. And of course, a big thank you to our patrons for supporting the production of these videos. Every little bit helps and we greatly appreciate you for it. And also follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.